Hello friends, today I have come with something new that is about literary devices. What are literary devices actually? We are going to talk about. Literary devices are backbone of any literary work. In simple words, a literary device helps the writer to express what is not possible in simple words. With the help of a literary device, a writer can express his feelings, emotions, and his imaginations very clearly. And literary devices can show the reader what is intended by the writer. On the other side, literary devices make the writing more complex, dramatic, curious, and become a major thread of the writing work. Actually, richness of any literary work depends on the literary devices. Now, I'm going to talk about five rich literary devices. First is paradox. Actually, a paradox is a statement which seems on its face to be logically contradictory or absurd, yet turns out to be interpretable in a way that makes sense. An instance is the conclusion to John Donne's sonnet, Death be not proud. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. The paradox is used occasionally by almost all poets, but was a persistent and central device in 17th century metaphysical poetry. In both its religious and secular forms, Donne, who wrote a prose collection titled Problems and Paradoxes, exploited the figure constantly in his poetry. The canonization, for example, is organized as an extended proof, full of local paradoxes, of the paradoxical thesis that sexual lovers are saints. Paradox is also a frequent component in verbal wit. Second literary device I'm going to talk about is allusion. Allusion is a passing reference without explicit identification to a literary or historical person, place, or event, or to another literary work or passage. Elizabethan Thompson's Litany in Time of Plague. Brightness falls from the air, queens have died young and fair, dust hath clothed Helen's eye. The unidentified Helen is the last line, alludes to Helen of Troy. Most allusions serve to illustrate or expand upon or enhance a subject, but some are used in order to undercut it ironically by the discrepancy between the subject and the allusion. In the lines from T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, describing a woman at her modern dressing table, the chair she sat in, like a burnished throne, glowed on the marble. Metaphor is derived from Greek meta, meaning over, and phera, meaning to carry. The term metaphor is one of the most widespread literary figures or devices in which one thing or idea is carried over to another thing or idea to make a new entity which shares the characteristics of both. In metaphor, it is boldly spoken of as if it actually were the other. Thus, in the following metaphor, Bacon does not say that the books are like food, but he speaks of them as if they actually were food. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. Metaphor is the fundamental language of poetry because it adds to and enriches the meaning of poems or plays. See how in the following lines Shakespeare uses nautical terms to describe the human situation. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at flood, leads on to fortune. Next literary device is imagery. It is the process of making thought vivid by presenting it to the mind in the form of images which stimulate the senses. There are two main types of imagery, the literal and the figurative. While the literal imagery is purely descriptive, the figurative imagery calls to mind, through metaphors or similes, the real things which can be perceived by the senses. Therefore, the primary appeal of imagery is sensuous and not rational. It translates the abstract into concrete and the general into the specific and precise. Although its natural appeal is to the sense of sight, it also attempts to stimulate the sense of touch, taste, and smell. Next, literary devices. Epigraph. Reading literature, you may have come across a work where the author, under the title, has included a quotation for some other work. Often, the quotation is in italics. When an author does this, she is using what's called an epigraph, like an allusion. An epigraph is a reference to another work that an author hopes will help readers understand her own work. Unlike an allusion, an epigraph stands apart from the text itself rather than being included in it. Let's take a look at an epigraph from T.S. Eliot's famous poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The epigraph is from Dante's Inferno and is meant to help Eliot's reader understand that the poem that follows is a kind of confession. If I but thought that my response were made to one perhaps returning to the world, this tongue of flame would cease to flicker. But since up from these depths no one has yet returned alive, if what I hear is true, I answer without fear of being shamed.